I'd like to bring us slowly to the close of this episode, which was an awful, an awesome and useful. That's what I wanted to say. Please cut it out.
This was an awful episode.
Lapsus.
Welcome to the What's Your Baseline podcast. In this show, we talk about our experiences and lessons learned in enterprise architecture and business process management. What's Your Baseline is designed to be for everyone. Newbies who are just getting started with these topics, organizations who want to improve their EA and BPM groups and the value they get from it, as well as practitioners who want to get a different perspective and care about the discipline.
Each episode will tackle different key topics, providing context, background, best practices, and stories from the road, inviting you to learn from our challenges and successes, and demonstrating key tools to help you set up your practice and get the most out of it.
I'm your host, Roland Wolt, and I'm joined today by my co-host, JM Erlinson. Hey, JM, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Roland. Today is all of our recording days is a special day, but it's hump day. It's a Wednesday, so I'm looking forward to a little podcast action to bring the spirits up. How you been?
I'm doing absolutely fine. You know, it's finally starting to getting summer here, except, of course, in the basement where I sit and do the recording, which sounds like a dungeon and it has minus temperatures. But outside, it's pretty nice. But I also heard, JM, that where you are, it's pretty nice outside as well. You know, you have buildings there that have a very interesting architecture just across the street. And lo and behold, we have a very interesting topic for you today, because we're going to talk about, well, not the real architecture, but enterprise architecture. And I have a guest for you.
You do, yes. I live in Toronto, for those who are unaware, and we have some fantastic physical architecture. But I know that organizations really struggle a lot with understanding the value, understanding the strategic importance of enterprise architecture. But we do have one of the fantastic thought leaders about that topic today as our fantastic guest, Mr. Luca de Risi. Luca, how are you doing today?
Hi, JM. Hi, Roland. I'm doing great. Thank you very much for inviting me. Glad to be here with you.
And we're waiting, and we don't take videos here, but I see the skyline of New York in the background of Luca right now. But obviously, he's in the most beautiful town in the world, in Paris, right? Which I heard had some garbage collection issues the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, luckily that's over. No, you don't say. That was a mess. And actually, that's Singapore you see behind me.
Oh,
I lived in
okay.
Singapore for 3 years. Yeah.
I know. I remember. Yes, I remember. Oh, well.
Oh, I love Singapore. It's a beautiful place. I was there when I was much, much younger, so I think I didn't really get the full, living person's time. I was there when I was 15 and when I was 12, so I went there twice. It was really beautiful. I enjoyed it, but it's been a long time since then. When were you last in Singapore?
I was in Singapore 3 years back. Was there for 3 years. Still in Mega, been in Mega for some time now. It's been, 13 years already. Started in France, went all the way to Boston, where I met Roland, actually, for the first time.
Yeah.
When I was working in Boston. Then I managed APAC operations based in Singapore, and now back in Paris. It's a great place.
Yeah, I remember the food stalls being fantastic. I mean, was it the docks, or the sort of Portlands area has a whole bunch of food stall markets, or the food halls. Was that still around? Or you can go one stall gives you one item for your dinner and you sort of assemble it?
Are you referring to Singapore or Boston?
Singapore.
Yeah. In Singapore, you have those hawker centers, which are basically places, indoors or outdoors, with a lot of stands, tables in the middle, and everyone goes there to eat. It's cheap. It's so good. You have food from all around. Is it Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand? You have it all, Vietnam. No, it's great. You can eat for the most expensive, luxurious dinner or the cheapest dinner, and for $2, you have a full dinner, and it's great.
That's amazing. Yeah, I remember. I miss that food. I love satay. I'm a huge fan, and of course, with it being very multilingual, obviously you're at least 2 languages. Did you pick up any of the languages while you were in Singapore?
Well, I went there and I thought to myself, I'm going to learn Chinese, but I never did.
Mm-hmm. I've heard that's a little bit of a challenging, particularly with the tones when you come from sort of like a non-tonal language.
Especially because everyone there speaks English. It's the national language. So there's no need to learn Chinese unless you really want to have the experience. So in the end, I wanted to, but no, it didn't happen.
Well, as Roland well knows, and some of our listeners know, I'm in the process of trying to learn Japanese to at least have a couple of languages that I can use. But once again, the writing system is always a little bit of a challenge. I think people go through their whole life learning kanji. It takes a long time. I'm still on hiragana and katakana.
Well,
That's
Jam. I just read a meme yesterday that went along the lines of, "Oh, if you don't remember what you want to say, just say, oh, I forgot the English word for this." Because A, everybody thinks you're bilingual, and B, nobody realized that you're an idiot.
Good trick. Well, today's topic is going to be a little bit more about helping CIOs realize that they're not an idiot and use enterprise architecture to drive strategy. But before we get to that, Luca, we've heard a little bit about your background. Tell us a little bit more about you as a person. Your hobbies, your interests, your bucket list items. We love to get our audience knowing you a little bit better before we get into the professional competency.
Yeah, happy to, JM. Look, until 10 months ago, I wouldn't sleep because of work. And now I have a very little 10-month-old reason not to sleep at night. Her name is Charlize, beautiful daughter. Talking about hobbies, I'd like to tell you I'm a bicyclist, a salsa dancer, guitar player. I used to do all that, I promise. But right now, father and CEO are two full-time jobs, trust me.
And it will never change. I can tell you that I have two boys who are 21 and 23, almost in summer. You have that role, and that's what you are. You just have less contact with them.
Well, I'm very excited just starting there.
And now you are the CEO of a company called Mega. So tell me a little bit about the company Mega and your role as CEO. What have you been doing? What are some things that have been driving your activities and your support of the marketplace and your customers?
Absolutely. Happy to do that. Look, Mega is I hope, quite a renowned software company for enterprise architecture. SaaS software. We have, 400 people around the globe, 10 offices, and we've been around for quite some time. A bit like you with Software AG, we've been around for 33 years already. But as you can tell, we are very young. Dynamic, no, honestly, jokes apart, dynamic company, a lot of young talent, motivated, so many different nationalities and countries. It's really great. And why am I the CEO today? Look, I've always loved business. I love architecture itself, but I started in pre-sales in France. Then I did the same job in the US, country manager in Singapore. So it was always business driven. Then I came back to Paris as a chief operating officer, and one thing led to the other, and I made CEO, but just 3 months ago, and it's really nice. Look, I think it's going to be a great year, and I have good plans moving forward.
Well, that's wonderful. And with being a new CEO, I can assume it's a lot of things to take on, but it sounds like this is something you really care about. Because I feel like there's lots of people who can be CEOs of companies. Take up the business reins, help to engage with investors, help to be the figurehead and face of the organization. But when you really care about the technology and practice, which is what we're going to talk about today, particularly the practice of enterprise architecture, and that makes all the difference. So let's pivot into that. Today's conversation is all about enterprise architecture, and particularly why a CIO may need enterprise architecture or should need enterprise architecture as part of their focus. Let's start by defining terms and reasons why. So tell me a little bit about the field of enterprise architecture for those who are tuning in for the first time. And then what are some key drivers behind the need for enterprise architecture, particularly at the CIO level?
That's a great question. For those who may have not heard about enterprise architecture, I don't know why they would be connected to this podcast, but to me, enterprise architecture starts with the management of the application portfolio. Enterprise architects are essentially the owners of the application portfolio, but from there, they serve the whole organization, and they are the right arm of the CIO essentially, because they provide support for business transformation. They give advice on good governance, application obsolescence, business transformation, process mapping and transformation, items that are crucial today to transformation. The thing is, why is that important? I've seen a big change in the market in the last, say, 2 to 3 years. Enterprise architecture, the way we saw it at Mega, at least, was a nice to have. I mean, EA was there. We've been around for 30 years. There's a reason for that. But it was always one group in the IT department thinking that EA was the holy grail, but everyone else thought, is it really? Recently, it's changed. Right. I've spoken to so many CIOs, and there's a couple of reasons why now they need EA. It's like I've seen demand grow by 20 to 30% year on year for the last 3 years. It's great. In the US, I read that there's 15% more enterprise architect people per year. It's huge. There's a real growth in the population, in the need for enterprise architects.
And how does that come together? Why is that need? Is it just because CIOs have more power, or are there other reasons behind it?
It's because of the whole ecosystem. I mean, number one, cloud. Mm-hmm. All applications are going to cloud, more slowly or faster, but everything is going to the cloud, and someone needs to manage that. And in many organizations, that's the role of architects. You put all your applications to the cloud, you bring in new technologies, emergent technologies. Well, that's a lot of data to manage. And then data is scattered in so many departments, so many tools, so many databases, unstructured databases. It becomes very quickly a big mess. And then there's security, more data, more cloud, and then, more exposure to threats and vulnerabilities. Architects have a big role to play in all those topics. And when I speak to CIOs, they say, well, yeah, I need EA because of the cloud and because of security.
Yeah, but those are all IT topics. Nothing wrong with IT topics. They obviously exist. It's a thing. But you also mentioned business transformation. So connect those two things to me, because what I have in my mind, and I play dumb here, what I have in my mind is obviously some people sitting in a basement, trying to sort out what they have in apps and are busy with themselves, And what is the connection to actually the change that an organization shall go through and it change their business model?
I love the way you phrase it, because those topics are really not IT, actually. I mean, yes, of course, they sound IT, like cloud security, but take security, for instance. Security is not just about testing servers. Security is about understanding which servers to test in order to make sure that your processes can operate, that your business capabilities can operate. So it's all about resiliency. It's all about making sure that the business is safe. Mm-hmm. And same for the cloud. Cloud is not only a migration of applications to the cloud. It's really understanding the business experience, the user experience, and making sure that it works. And in the end, look, to me, that boils down to a key difference. The difference between continuous change and business transformation. If you talk about continuous change, you're more in IT, I agree with you. Mm-hmm. Continuous change is what? To me, it's business as usual. Continuous change is maybe the baseline of the enterprise architecture role. It's about, integrating new technologies, retiring obsolete technologies, make sure that you keep the lights on. So essentially, you manage the application portfolio in a sound way. But then business transformation is different. Transformation is a project. Like a construction project, you want to build a new smart city, for instance. You need to understand the business objectives. Like a project, it requires planning, it requires blueprinting, it requires coordination of different stakeholders, and that's EA. EA in the end is really about business transformation, not only continuous change.
I'm kind of with you. So I agree with you. Obviously, it's the blueprinting, it's the planning, it's the measurement, it's seeing if you really got the benefits that you wanted and all that type of stuff. But I think it's also transformation is not a one and done, right? So to stick with other cartoons, I just saw one which were the heaviest objects in the universe, and one was it's the sun, it's the black hole and whatnot, and the third one, and then the heaviest one, digital transformation in Germany, which obviously doesn't lift off, So I think the times have changed, and that might be one reason why you see that demand in EAs that you've seen is we're in a state of constant flux. Right. So it's not a one-time project. It's an ongoing thing. And I doubt that we get out of that situation, at least not in our lifetimes. It will be always churn and always change.
I agree with you. In fact, a couple of things. First, it's not just one transformation project. I mean, you're not building one thing and then stopping it. In a company, there's a multitude of projects. So you do several in parallel, you do one, you stop one, you start another. So it's a constant transformation in that sense, but it's always driven by methodology.
And it's not a one and done. I've seen projects that implemented a new system or did changes to a system and said, that's our transformation, I'm done. Which obviously is not the case. But maybe have you seen an example in your past of a client that has done a successful transformation that you can share? Obviously, no business secrets here.
I won't say names, but yeah, sure. I have a couple of examples. A lot of people are interested in the bad example. What not to do. I can give you both if you want.
Please do.
Everybody has those experiences. I think the good ones are the ones that are of interest.
I'll tell you both. If I start with the negative experience, it's not my direct experience, actually. It's an article that I think really pointed to the problem with some transformation projects. NHS program in 2011. They wanted to digitize patient records. They did. Years later, it didn't work after £10 billion spent. And why didn't it work? According to the Watcher review, which is what the article was based on, they said that they thought it was essentially a technical update. I mean, yeah, it's like a cloud migration. It may seem like it's IT, but no, it's business driven. You need to understand the user experience and how it's going to be used by the business so that it works. And then the same article quoted the National Audit Office that said that essentially so many projects in the organization were managed in that way. And that's why transformation for them didn't succeed. But you're right, Roland. I'll give you a positive experience.
Two examples that I had. One is I was working with the German Armed Forces. Back in 2003, we were talking about the same thing, digital patient information. And I think they introduced it in 2020, 2021, something like that. So it takes forever doing this. And the other example that I had was a big home loan company here. And they were using our tools to map out roadmaps and all that type of stuff. And the lady was so proud of what they did and said, let me show you to our war room. Right. And then we went into another room and it was plastered with Gantt charts, and said, we have 139 projects going on this time. And the only thought I had was, you're doomed. You don't know what you're doing. This will go south. And lo and behold, it took a couple of years, but it went south.
Well, I think that we're hearing that a lot of the common pitfalls, or at least pitfalls we've seen, are of scattered focus. So not a clear why that we've talked about these in previous episodes, a move away from people. So the who is not answered, and the value proposition for strategic change is not clearly outlined and validated across the stakeholders. So it's these pieces of enterprise architecture become the fabric of the organization, right? This isn't just plumbing. Like this is your house. This is the whole house put together. And being able to live in that requires that you have an understanding of the experience people will have with the new platforms you're bringing in, with the new strategies you're trying to implement, and how you're going to achieve that. We'll talk a little bit later about how I like to break things down and what you think about it from a capability perspective. But let's talk about successful transformations. What have you seen, and specifically, what about those transformations made them successful?
Look, I can think of several examples. I can give you one here in my home country in France. It's a big insurance company. You can guess there's not that many here, but it's a big insurance company in France. And they wanted to really do a business transformation effort. They wanted to change their business model from a group insurance to a individual focused insurance. So big business transformation encompassing so many functions all around the company. And the way they did it was with enterprise architects. They were one of the key enablers of the transformation. How? What they did is they started with the end-to-end business process mapping. I said earlier, architects own the application landscape very often. But then, again, that's more about the continuous change and the good governance. But when you start a transformation project, then it often starts with the business, understanding the business objectives. They did that with capability mapping, but also end-to-end process. But then those processes alone were not enough. They connected those to the key IT systems, those that were used, those that would have to evolve with the transformation. And the third thing they did was the data. They wanted to share the same business glossary, the same terms between all the stakeholders, and they gathered 6 different departments around that. So they really put together all these people to work on the same data knowledge repository, And I can only say that it worked. That took a few years based on what they said. They aligned departments, they improved the operational performance. They even worked on reducing some of the operational risk they had in the transformation exercise.
I'm hearing some keywords here. You said the word standardize. You said central location. You said alignment. I mean, these are pretty core components. And I like to see these enterprise architects as relationship brokers often. And it seems like what you're trying to do is give them a vector for relationship brokerage, right? That's the platform is enabling as a catalyst the practice you're trying to embody. But you've also used the words business process and enterprise architecture in the same sentence. We try in our best in this podcast to break that barrier down. It seems like that's the core principle by which you operate. Tell me why you think they're the same thing, or at least are part of the same family, and why that approach is so effective.
That's one of the top questions that we keep asking each other around here. Is business process mapping part of EA or not? I'm not sure I'll be able to give you an answer. When I speak to customers, I see that usually those are 2 different practices. Enterprise architecture, I often see in the IT department, the right arm of the CIO to make strategic decisions, at least when they're the most influential, rationalization, merger and acquisition, post-merger rationalization, transformation. So really influential in IT. And I see the business process team being more under the chief operating officer or somewhere in the business, but they do work together. So in some cases, smaller organizations maybe, enterprise architects take care of the whole thing. Actually, today, I would go one step further. Enterprise architects today, I see doing the traditional EA-BPA, business process analysis combo, but in the last few years, I've seen them take care of data. And you can also say data governance is a very specific domain, business or IT actually, and the chief data officer takes care of it, which is true. But in many places, the same team or 2 very adjacent teams, EA and data, take care of it together.
What I found really interesting, so I've seen the same, Luca. I've seen the different silos, and unfortunately, I've seen more people who do not talk to each other than people who do talk to each other, but that's a different story. But one little flavor that I've seen there was people who created transformation org units, right? And those were seen either as enabler. Oh yeah, we have a focus team that drives our organization forward. But they were also seen as a threat, because what does it actually mean if you bring an interdisciplinary team under one umbrella? Well, you take power away from whatever IT departments, from business units, and all that type of stuff. So it's really interesting. But I found those transformation aspects, where you set up a transformation office and all those things, I think that's the path going forward for both disciplines. What are your thoughts on that?
I'll be very direct with you. I think we've both been at this for a while, several years. And I have to say, 10 years back, those departments would not speak to each other. I would go one step further, talk about governance, risk, and compliance. The risk management department did not want anything to do with EAs or business process managers.
Yeah.
Honestly, I have seen this change dramatically recently. At several customers, I don't know if I can say names, some in the West Coast of the US, for instance, that will recognize themselves. We worked initially with the business transformation team, so in charge of mapping processes and relating IT to processes. Mm-hmm. And they brought on enterprise architects by themselves. They were the ones to say, hey, transformation doesn't work in silos. Mm-hmm. That to me is a key statement. Transformation doesn't work in silos. They said that, and they said, okay, let's bring in enterprise architects and let's connect with the ITSM database and with the data governance tool that we have. And so many of our customers, they connect all those tools together. It happens in France, it happens in the US, it happens actually everywhere. And yes, to your question, JM, that is our vision, connected EA. What we do at Mega is we take those 4 solutions and we put them on one platform. And yes, we do believe that connected EA is the future. But absolutely agree with you. 10 years back, that was a bit slow. Today, customers ask us.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. People ask for what they need and they're being informed. I think that people like you and companies like Mega are trying to inform people as to the possibilities out there that they may have missed. We think of this often as latent needs, but the truth of the matter is that thought leadership and project analysis are driving, the emergence of these needs that are as a result of observed failures, observed successes. You're trying to replicate best practices. And that leads us to a little bit of a close for this section, because we want to give people a moment to process things that are coming through. This is, by the way, fantastic. I'm hoping everyone out there in listener land is enjoying this as much as I am. But we're going to leave you with a brief question before we take a musical break about what projects you, our listeners, have seen or have worked on were driven by EA or through Transformation Office. And how have these projects succeeded? So what patterns can you see and recognize in them, in their stakeholders, in their addressing of people, in their understanding of technology, in their building of structures and frameworks that support enterprise architecture and business process as a combined offering? And where have they struggled? Where have you seen them fall off the rails? We'll leave you for a moment and come back with our second section with our guest, Luca de Risi.
And welcome back. So what we typically do is the first segment is the why, and then in the second segment we talk about the how. But Luca, you mentioned very early in our conversation the topic of security, and everybody was like, "Oh yeah, boring topic," and how does that fit into this? But I think it's a little bridge between the why and the how. What is your opinion on this, and why does Mega and you focus on this topic?
I agree with you. I think that CIOs want EA today for transformation, but also for security. Typically, if you don't know what's going to be impacted by an incident, then you just don't know what to do to fix the incident. And that's the main reason why CIOs want EA to help solve security issues. There's also this topic of resiliency. Resiliency is about understanding the impact of security risks on the business so that then you can prioritize which controls to apply. There's so many vulnerabilities, so many threats today, cyber attacks, natural catastrophes, and others, that prioritizing is key to risk management. You cannot just put controls everywhere and prevent people from working.
Yeah.
You need to do the penetration tests that have value on the business. For instance, if you do penetration tests on a server that's not connected to the internet, that's pretty much useless. Mm-hmm. If you do your tests on those servers that host critical applications necessary to the operation of your core business capabilities and core processes, that's super useful. So in order to manage resiliency, you need EA.
Yeah, and we had an episode a couple of months ago where we spoke with Rick Smith about security architecture, and his mantra was like, what is the mission? Whatever you do, what is the mission? And then he spoke about, okay, how do you assess what to look for, how to assess the risk, and where to put your tests and all that stuff. I'm 100% with you.
And it's also not something you could get from IT alone, right? This is why this connected approach is so important, because you need your stakeholders from the business to inform the value or the value assessment to business operations of each of these technology capabilities.
I'm with you. One more thing. It's not just our vision about connected EA. It's also that most regulations today for resiliency request that. In Europe, we have EU DORA. It ends by Resiliency Act. Spare me the first two letters. In the UK, you have FCA OR, also for resiliency. And you have similar ones in the US and other countries. They all tell you that you need to prioritize your controls based on business impacts. So it's all about understanding the link between IT and the business.
And I actually wanted to follow up on this because there's a word that I said in the first segment that we haven't really talked through, and I wanted to ask your thoughts on it. We see a lot of people talking about the word capability rather than necessarily focusing or starting with business process or starting with architecture solution. How do you see capability as a sort of connection, a dovetail between the implementation of architecture and the operations of business? And do you use that as that bridge?
I have my opinion on this. Discussed with some customers, of course. But in the end, if you look at the first level of business capabilities and the first level of processes, what are you going to find? Finance, accounting, sales, services. It sounds a lot like they have the same names, right? So my conclusion on this is that capabilities are a tool used by enterprise architects to transform the application portfolio and services portfolio in connection with the business. Business processes, on the other side, are a tool used by business process managers, transformation managers, organization managers, all of those titles in the business to map the business in more detail, understanding which operations come before another, and then transforming IT based on processes. So to me, the two can live in parallel, but they're not done by the same people. What do you think?
That's an interesting perspective. I see it slightly different. To me, the two scenarios that you just saw is the how. How do I do this with an IT focus, with a process focus? I think capabilities are the what, right? So it's not capabilities of the individual skills, right? It's the capability of an organization to do something. And if you don't find an agreement on what you're talking about and how they come together, then how do you avoid the silos in an organization?
Roland, I agree with the definition. Capabilities are the what, processes are the how. If you, as an architect, you want to do the whole thing and give the complete picture, that's exactly what I would suggest you did. Capabilities for the what, processes for the how, IT for the implementation. But if I try to be super practical and do as little as possible with the highest possible results, because it's all about effort, right? You want to reduce effort for architects so that they can bring more value with less effort. If they have to choose, I would tell architects, start with business capabilities, not with processes.
Yeah, I'm following, and I think it's different use cases that we talk about, right?
Absolutely.
So if you have that urgent need to do something, yes, I'm with you, right? I would look at what's the scope of my implementation, or what's the scope of that transformation project that I have at hand. But speaking of which, and you alluded to it also in the first segment, the changing role of an architect. How do you see this coming, right? So how do you see that role evolving? Because on the one hand, you said, well, there's more interest, right? There's more people who go into this field. But then on the other hand, you said, well, IT changes, everything goes in the cloud, the roles change and all that type of stuff. How do you see, for a newbie who listens to this podcast and says, that's an interesting field, I want to go into this, how would you describe the 2023 job description of an architect? And how is that different to what you've seen in the past?
I think there's commonalities and things that stay in the role of the architect. Managing the application portfolio, business-oriented, supporting transformation, that stays. One thing that changes is the reasons why you need architecture. I mean, if you think about what we used to say 10 years back, we would say social networks, mobile, robotics, those were the changes we would talk about. It was still transformation. And now we speak about cloud migration, we speak about AI. So new technologies that go much faster actually than the previous ones. And those changes drive the need for EA. So one key difference is the specific reasons why CIOs need EA. And when I speak to CIOs today, they are much more interested in EA than they used to be. It used to be a nice to have from what I can see. And now, I mean, yes, you don't pay salaries with EA. I agree. It's not a runtime tool. I agree with you. But it's a necessary tool for those reasons, because there's so many threats, so many vulnerabilities, so much data to manage, so many cloud migrations that, yeah, it's more important, and you need good governance on that. So that may be my answer to your question. How did it change? It used to be a support role, a very useful support role. Now it's an indispensable role to drive cloud management, in some cases, data governance, because data is scattered. You need to make sense of it to do data lineage and bring value out of the data, and manage security. So yeah, the role evolves towards driving instead of supporting, and the role evolves towards more governance. Like, you rely on architects to own that governance, whereas before it was still more supporting some functions of governance. What do you think?
So when we talk about that in the context of the security you've been talking about, the resiliency you're talking about, that leads me to sort of feel like this is moving from just a basic designer to somebody who's more orchestrating this effort. Tell me the kinds of things that you'd want them to do, in particularly using technology as a catalyst, but practice as the core of operating. What do they do, and how do they do it?
Fully agree with the role of the architect in that sense. From a designer to an orchestrator, that's a great way to put it. In particular, when it comes to security, orchestrator means that architects are not going to do it all. It's really like when you're renovating or building a house, architects don't do it all. Architects, they understand your business needs, and then they tell you how to change the walls and break the walls to have the space that you need and make sure that it's all very stable, right? Well, it's an orchestrator. Same thing in an organization. setting technology standards, for instance, to make sure that you use the technologies that are allowed into organizations
Right.
for reasons of coherence, consistency, but also safety. Defining, so really when it comes to security, it's defining integration protocols,
Right.
avoiding obsolescence, setting guardrails, architectural guardrails, what you can do, what you cannot do. So yeah, orchestrating in the sense of you cannot do it instead of, but you have to enable others so that they can do, but also orchestrator in terms of setting the right guidance and guardrails for security.
And this leads me to an interesting thought here, because we've talked about this in almost every episode. Roland, I think this is getting old hat, but and Luca, feel free to correct me here, but it feels like part of the enterprise architect's role touches into change management, because you're having to earn people's attention. You're having to be clear in communication. You're having to manage a changing set of requirements, and you're having to sustain and grow this practice over the course of the evolution of the organization. I mean, how does change management and EA work? Are EAs now change managers? Like, how do you see those two working hand in hand?
From what I can see, EAs are often involved in projects. Like in many transformation projects, but even, the transformation projects like changing a CRM or changing an ERP, there's often one or even more architects involved in that project in order to help organize it and manage all the IT impacts,
Right. So it is really they're part of that team. Architects working on an island, I feel like that's the recipe for disaster, because they're not getting the right information, and they're not able to communicate that information that they have and the structure that they're building with the rest of the team. It's like trying to build a house where only one person gets to see the blueprints.
And then you have so many types of architects also, right? There's the enterprise architect, who may be more on the business perspective with the full visibility on the landscape. But then you have the domain architect, the solution architect, and those that are on projects maybe solution architects. Whereas those who have the complete picture set the guardrails, security architecture, business architecture.
I agree. I've seen that as well, right? Which also is a challenge, right? Because obviously they might live or see the same thing with a different lens and might not be aligned. But maybe to bring this segment to a close, we spoke about security as the bridge, between the why and the how a little bit. But dear listeners, before we break for a couple of seconds and play some music, I'd be interesting to learn, and I hope you think about this. How does your organization approach resiliency? What incidents have you gone through, and how have you responded to those? Right. And maybe more importantly, because we're going to talk in the next segment about architects in general, how has EA helped with or maybe hindered in that response? We'll leave you alone for a couple of seconds, and we come back talking about architects in our third segment.
All right, we're back with our final segment for the show. Luca, this has been a fascinating conversation so far. And I hate to do this, but we got to now turn it to the negative. Lessons learned, things that were maybe a struggle for architects. What gets in the way of success in architecture? What disconnects CIOs from enterprise architecture?
Yes, JM, this is one of my favorite topics actually when it comes to EA.
Oh no, you love the negative.
Yeah, when you put it that way, okay.
Good.
Why does EA fail and how do we make it better? Right? We like to map EA success in 4 steps, from noisy to influential. Noisy is when EAs know that they have to do it, but no one else sees it. It's like seen as too much effort. it's too slow. Then it's useful when you have demonstrated value on one use case. Then it goes to trusted. Now you have demonstrated value and people come to you for information. You have shown value with several use cases, and now you're going to do more use cases because people ask you for support. And then influential is when you're part of strategic decisions. The CIO now comes to you after a merger to rationalize the organization or to the application landscape, or even should we do that merger from an IT perspective? So you're part of key strategic and security related decisions. And why do I say that? Because it's very hard to go from noisy to useful. A lot of architects that I've seen in the past struggled, and I went to visit them, and the chief architect told me, Luca, can you help us market ourselves internally? They said, EA is too slow. EA is too much effort. The CIO doesn't see the value. Can you help us market ourselves internally? And I think that is why does that happen? Because a lot of architects, especially in the past, focused on a documentation approach to EA. I like to call it the academic EA approach. When you speak to architects, you always hear this a lot of notions like frameworks or notations. I'm a TOGAF architect. I'm an Archimate architect. I'm a BPMN architect. I'm a UML architect. And notations and frameworks are super important because they drive methodology. They allow you to educate a lot of younger architects to the business, to the job, right? So it's super important, but it's not the end goal. It's a tool. So when architects focus too much on documentation, too much on the academic approach, that's when it fails. Too much effort. If you want to document your strategy, your processes, your capabilities, your data, your information, your applications, your infrastructure, by the time that you're at your application level, your strategy has changed a couple of times. So the academic approach gets you stuck. And that's why I'm sure we're going to agree on this, Roland and JM. Sound architecture, efficient architecture is based on two things. It's based on use cases. Don't try to boil the ocean. Start small, go from noisy to useful. You cannot be influential overnight. So it's a step-by-step approach based on use cases. And you're going to start with building your EA baseline. Get your application inventory right. Try to do it in a few weeks or months instead of a few years. For that, use a horizontal approach instead of a vertical approach. Try to have everything documented instead of just a few applications, but all the way down to the functionalities, So go quickly, show value, and then get to the next step. And the next step then opens a large landscape of possibilities. You can go from noisy to useful or useful to trusted at this point by expanding towards technology obsolescence, technology standards, cloud migration, architecture governance. You name it, building the business glossary. There's several avenues, but they all start in the same place, demonstrating value.
I agree. And I like your scale a lot. Right. So this is a really nice mental framework to think about this, which I'm pretty sure most architecture organizations don't have. Right. And I also agree with you need to communicate stuff. And it's almost a year ago, we had Laurie Kelly on the show talking about how to communicate value of architecture to your stakeholders, right? Who could be the business people, who could be your clients, who could be whoever you work with, which is super important. And she had a good point, in my opinion, where she said, oh yeah, we want to bring architecture to the front, right? To the people who actually use it. Because what I've seen in the past was quite the opposite, and you alluded a little bit to this when you said the academics, people sitting there and saying, oh, we need a company-wide glossary, or we need to have this and this and this. To be quite honest, nobody cares, right? You care, but you're the only guys in the organization who care, right? And I think the challenge is, as an architect, how do I not only change that perception, but how am I actually useful to where the organization wants to go? So I had conversations with architects who said, well, forget those enterprise architects. They're dead. Solution architecture is the way going forward. It needs to be practical, hands-on, and whatnot. I think the underlying challenge is nobody sees the artifacts. Nobody sees what architects actually do. And then they get fired from the projects. Oh, no, we don't need this. Let's the equivalent to hop in the pickup truck, drive to the home improvement store, buy some 2x4s and start hammering your skyscraper together. Right.
There's no other way to say it. Huh? It's shifting from the semantics of architecture to the results, to the outcomes.
Yeah.
From semantics to outcomes. And earlier, Roland, I mentioned there will be two things. The first thing is focus on use cases and on the value. The second thing, to me, that is a key success factor to obviously to succeed in architecture is automation. Automation meaning that architecture, especially when you take it with a connected approach, it encompasses applications, processes, capabilities. Then you can extend all the way to data, risks. It's a lot of information.
Yeah.
If you want to be efficient and demonstrate value, you need to be able to focus on the data analysis more than on the data population. So automation means how to suck in the data from where it resides. So when you talk about applications, how can you discover your applications? Or maybe how can you discover your technologies and understand which of those technologies are business applications? When you take data from a ServiceNow or you discover it with agents and servers, you're going to find a lot of programs, a lot of security devices, antiviruses. Those are not applications that architects want to handle. Those are technologies. Applications use technologies, but business applications or applications are used by the business and then connected to business capabilities. Well, if with some artificial intelligence, you can take all that bunch of technologies, identify which ones of them are applications, and then with the same algorithms, connect automatically those applications to your business capabilities, well, that's automation. Now you have a leg up. You can build your EA baseline pretty much automatically, and then you can start doing your rationalization, gap analysis, assessments, etc.
Yeah, you're making the case for the process mining for technology, right? It should be the same thing, right?
You see it with your process lens, I reckon.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But it's the same idea, right? You take data, you bring it in, and then the tool will give you the insights. And I said that multiple times, right? Without going astray here, what process mining tools do is they take data and create information. Right. But it still needs a human to transform the information into knowledge. Right. And obviously wisdom to say when not to touch things. But I think that bridge from data to information to knowledge, I think that's something that's missing in EA tools.
Well, I would like to say that it was missing because spoiler alert, it's coming soon.
Oh, hey. Sign me up for the demo, Luca. Sign me up.
But I know we're so aligned on this because process mining, absolutely. Technology discovery and AI for APM automation, same idea applied to applications. But then when you think about it, data. Today, with data governance tools like the one we propose, but there's a lot of products on the market, you go scan your databases. Is it your structured databases, your unstructured databases? You deduce what is the metadata out of it, so the structure of your data. And then you even transform that into a business glossary, so your concepts and your terms, right? And this is the same concept applied to applications, to processes, to data, so that then you can make sense of all that information without spending all your time populating and researching the data.
Yeah, I agree. Nobody wants to create the first draft of something, right? So yes, if you have an empty notebook page, virtual, you already failed, right? You need to offer something to bring this in. But the last question that I have on this topic, and I see we're approaching the hour, and that's obviously the reasonable adult in the room here who says, let's stick to the hour-ish, is what is your opinion on the maturity of the EA discipline itself? Because when you think about it, Zachman in the 80s, that's stone ages away. And I know he's still alive. That's super long ago. But I think the discipline still struggles with finding a consensus about KPIs and when do you do good architecture and what does good actually mean and all these things. So since I know you're a very opinionated man, I'm pretty sure you have an opinion on that topic as well.
Luckily for us, all three of us EA software providers, I think that the EA maturity is quite low still. It's been a long time, but things have changed. I mean, the IT has changed, business technology has changed, so it is normal that the practice evolves, right? It's still low maturity. The difference is that now the need is established. There is a need for EA. Before, if you didn't show value, at the end of the year, you lost your budget. Now, you do EA because it's a requirement in the organization. So the need is there. It's established. I want to say EA has become mission critical. But at the same time, it's not completely mature. Why do I say that? Because we haven't agreed on a standard practice yet. There's not a single notation that everyone adheres to. There's not a single way to do it. For instance, some are going to say, oh, you need to follow TOGAF and Archimate. And some are going to say, maybe more like you and I, yes, those are super important. But if you want to succeed, you need to focus on use cases. What are those use cases?
Yeah. And I think that hearing you say that, it feels like EA is still proving itself out, but it's proving itself out now in positions of influence. I mean, it sounds like, you talked about this movement from noisy to useful to trusted to influential as an enterprise architect. That seems to also apply to enterprise architecture, because now I think, if I'm hearing you right, we're at the trusted stage, maybe moving towards influential. But the more that we see enterprise architecture as a mission critical, as a strategic component of the business, as a CIO empowering discipline, the more we can move towards standards, we can scale and bring that influence across the world and across organizations, regardless of size, regardless of scope, because it is a common language. We speak together to make positive, lasting, and resilient business change possible.
I love the way that you shift the noisy to influential from one single organization to the practice as a whole. I would argue that the practice is at useful, not trusted. Why?
I agree.
I agree. We're not noisy anymore. We architects are not noisy anymore because we have proven our value. That's useful. But then useful means that we have proven value on something. I think that out there, it is accepted that architects manage the application landscape. Application portfolio management is, I think, the common ground to all architecture departments around. But then what comes next? Is it business process? Is it business architecture, capabilities, etc.? That depends. So that's why I say the common ground is accepted. That's more useful to me.
I do agree. Yes. So, JM, you're a little bit overachieving here.
I'm always the optimist of the two of us.
Yep. I'd like to bring us to the end of this episode, which was obviously an awesome conversation with Luca and obviously JM, always with you, because otherwise we wouldn't run that podcast. But when I look at the different topics, maybe just to summarize it, is, well, we were talking about EA as a discipline versus transformation, and how EA can play a role in there, right? Typically as part of the planning and project and blueprinting and all those stages in there. We also spoke, which I found really interesting, about the fact that a lot of EAs in the past had a more academic approach to it, and they failed, right? So they created, to stick with Luca's new official EA scale, they got stuck at the noisy stage, and that just created more noise that nobody wanted, right? And I agree with you, Luca. I think we're a little bit further ahead as a discipline right now. And the means to go this is obviously that the use case approach that we spoke about. The interesting thing, and then I will obviously close it out, is the question: how does the tool landscape, how does the discipline will improve, right? Like I said a couple of minutes ago, nobody wants to create the first draft, right? So to which degree of automation will we see the tools evolve, and not only vendors put in effort in there, but also organizations accept it and use it there? Or do they say, good enough is good enough? You know, the APM capabilities of my service now are good enough, right? We will see. Interesting questions. And I'm pretty sure, dear listeners, you have many more questions to our wonderful guest, Luca de Risi. So the one question, obviously, Luca, that I have for you at this point in the show is, how can people reach you? Where can they learn more about you and start a conversation with you?
Well, I'd be delighted to interact with some of the people in the audience. You can find me on LinkedIn, Luca de Risi. You can find me through the website. I'm sure people will redirect you to me or anyone who you need to speak to. And happy to get into more discussions.
We definitely will put links in the show notes, right? Not only to your LinkedIn, but also obviously to mega.com, right? So that people can see what the future of enterprise architecture holds. And with that, JM, hand it over to you.
I believe we've reached about the end of things. You know, it's funny. We always think, well, we're going to record a episode. We're going to stay in our lane in terms of time and try and keep it nice and crisp. And then we get into a fascinating conversation with a really amazing guest. And Luca, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your knowledge and thoughts and an opportunity for everyone to learn. And thank you to our audience for listening in and for giving us great feedback. You can continue to do that through hello@whatsyourbaseline.com. You can go to the website, whatsyourbaseline.com, for show notes about this particular show and about all the things you heard today, including links to Luca's website and all the things he does. Now, of course, if you want to leave us a rating on your podcatcher of choice, that would be fantastic. It's very useful for us to get these ratings and expand into everything we do. And of course, for this episode in particular, you can go to whatsyourbaseline.com/episode 45, which is this one. Yes, we're nearing the big 50. Oh, we got something special planned for you. But once again, I've had a really good time with this conversation, and hopefully you will too as you re-listen to this. But until the next one, friends, I've been J.M. Erlinson,
Luca de Risi,
and my name is Roland Wolt.
And we'll see you in the next one.